Black Power and Black History, New Dimensions of an Old Struggle by John Henrik Clarke. Figuratively speaking, the concept of Black Power and Black history are twins that were fathered by the same historical experience. This concept was created to counteract another concept, that the people of African descent had no history worthy of respect. The Europeans who started the slave trade and the colonial system that followed needed to propagate this concept in order to justify their actions. The present-day young Black militants are asking in many ways why the word history is so limited when it is applied to their people. They are beginning to learn belatedly that history, depending on how it is manipulated, can be either an instrument of oppression or of liberation. In most cases, what is called African history is only the history of Africa's contact with Europe, beginning with the slave trade. What is called Negro history is generally the history of American slavery and its subsequent effects. The Europeans who started the slave trade in the 15th century had to forget or pretend to forget all they had previously known about Africa's contribution to the development of mankind. The present-day Black Power and Black history advocates are trying to restore what the slave trade and the system of economic oppression took away. Their fight has long roots, and it was not started by Stokely Carmichael or H. Rap Brown. The roots of Black Power. In a formal sense, the concept of Black Power started in the 19th century, concurrent with the many attempts to restore Black men to an honorable place in history. The concept of Black Power confuses most people because they are looking for a complicated system. Black Power means no more or less than the right to determine your own destiny, starting with the control of your own communities. This is the same thing that every ethnic group in America has or is trying to get. Black Power without a respect for Black history is meaningless. Until the essential manhood of a people is respected, no power in their hands is effective. In a speech made in Cuba last year, Stokely Carmichael, while addressing himself to the subject, Black Power and the Third World, said, "Since 1966, the cry of the rebellions has been Black Power. In this cry, there was an ideology implied which the masses understood instinctively. It is because we are powerless that we are oppressed, and it is only with power that we can make the decisions governing our lives and our communities." Black Power is more than a slogan. It is a way of looking at our problems and the beginning of a solution. Because our color has been used as a weapon to oppress us, we must use our color as a weapon of liberation. This is the same as other people using their nationality as a weapon for their liberation. This coming together around our race was an inevitable part of our struggle. We recognize, however, that this is not the totality, only the necessary beginning. Then, while emphasizing the need for the cultural restoration of a people, he said, Black Power recognizes that while we are made to feel inferior, this is only that we can be easily exploited. Color and culture were and are key in our oppression. Therefore, our analysis of history and our economic analysis are rooted in these concepts. With power, we will take our birthright because it was with power that our birthright was taken from us. Black Power not only addresses itself to exploitation, but to the problem of cultural integrity. The 19th century Black militants and some before them were saying essentially the same thing in different ways. The fight for Black history. The fight against the distortion and suppression of the true history of the Africans and Afro-Americans was started long before the Civil War by free Negroes and escaped slaves who had learned to read and write. The Back to Africa idea has been a recurring theme in the lives of Black Americans for more than 100 years. The thought was strong during the formative years of the Colonization Society, and some of the most outstanding black men of the 18th and 19th centuries came under its persuasion. In the middle of the 19th century, while the issue of slavery was being debated in most of the country, the feeling for Africa among American blacks was growing stronger. Publications like Freedom's Journal and Douglas Monthly, edited by Frederick Douglass, called attention to the plight of the people of Africa as well as the black Americans. As far back as 1881, the renowned scholar and benefactor of West Africa, Dr. Edward Wilmot Blyden, speaking on the occasion of his inauguration as president of Liberia College, sounded the note for the organized teaching of the culture and civilization of Africa and decried the fact that the world's image of Africa was not in keeping with Africa's true status in world history. He stated, "The people generally are not yet prepared to understand their own interests in the great work to be done for themselves and their children. We shall be obliged to work for some time to come not only without the popular sympathy we ought to have, but with utterly inadequate resources." In all English-speaking countries, the mind of the intelligent Negro child revolts against the descriptions of the Negro given in elementary books, geographies, travels, histories, having embraced or at least assented to these falsehoods about himself. He concludes that his only hope of rising in the scale of respectable manhood is to strive for what is most unlike himself and most alien to his peculiar tastes. And whatever his literary attainments or acquired ability, he fancies that he must grind at the mill which is provided for him, putting in material furnished by his hands, bringing no contribution from his own field, and of course, nothing comes out but what is put in. Historical context of the Black Revolution. The great human drama now being called the Black Revolution in the USA has long historical roots, and it cannot be fully understood until it is seen in this context. In his 1944 book, Capitalism and Slavery, Dr. Eric Williams places the origin of this revolution in historical perspective and calls attention to its early development. When, in 1492, Columbus, representing the Spanish monarchy, discovered the New World, he set in train the long and bitter international rivalry over colonial possessions, for which, after 4.5 centuries, no solution has yet been found. Portugal, which had initiated the movement of international expansion, claimed the new territories on the ground that they fell within the scope of a papal bull of 1455, authorizing her to reduce to servitude all infidel people. The two powers, Spain and Portugal, to avoid controversy, sought arbitration, and as Catholics turned to the Pope, a natural and logical step in an age when the universal claims of the papacy were still unchallenged by individuals and governments. After carefully sifting the rival claims, the Pope issued in 1493 a series of papal bulls which established a line of demarcation between the colonial possessions of the states. The East went to Portugal and the West went to Spain. Though the announcement of the fact came much later, the European scramble for Africa and subsequently Asia and North America started with this act. The labor and raw materials of Africa, Asia, South America, and the West Indies financed the European Industrial Revolution. The Africans who were brought to the New World against their will were dehumanized and in most cases deculturized. They were neither respected Africans nor accepted New World Americans. They were renamed and became a marginal branch of the human family now referred to as Negroes. The Europeans needed a rationale for their actions, and a rationale was created with supporting concepts. The cruelest concept ever devised by the mind of man was created to support the slave trade and the colonial system that followed, the concept of race and the assumption that there are superior and inferior races. The Africans were depicted as a people without a history who had never properly handled power and who certainly had made no contribution to the development of human cultures, and thus the seeds of the present-day conflict were planted. Racism in education. The American Federation of Teachers Conference on Racism in Education, held in Washington, D.C. on December 8th to 10th, 1966, set in motion much of the present action and the debate about Black history and how it should be taught in the public schools. The noted actor, Ossie Davis, addressed the conference on the first day. His opening remarks were, "Those of us who are concerned, who are caught up, who really want to be involved in the revolution, must be prepared at this conference to tear aside our most private thoughts and prejudices." The tone for the conference had been set. For 2 days, more than 1,500 teachers and educators examined and indicted the American educational system. They were told that a curtain of ignorance hangs over the school systems of this nation, and that our children are not being educated to face the realities of this nation and this world. Cases of deliberate distortion of the role that Black Americans have played in the making of this country were pointed out. It was further stated that everyone from professional textbook writers to missionaries had participated in this distortion. Ossie Davis cited the English language as a basic transmitter of prejudice. In his speech entitled, "The English Language is My Enemy," he said that he counted 120 synonyms for the term blackness in Roget's Thesaurus, half of which were grossly unfavorable. Davis argued that right from the time a Black child learns the English language, he learns 60 ways to despise himself, and a white child learns 60 ways to aid and abet the crime. Keith E. Baird, a New York school teacher who followed Ossie Davis, talked about the importance of ethnic identification for Afro-Americans. Mr. Baird, a teacher of languages, spoke of the respected place in history as celebrated in the Jewish holiday of Hanukkah, of the Maccabees of biblical times. He also pointed out that in the process of ethnic identification, not only a person's individual attributes are considered, but the cultural identification of this group. Baird presented to the conference a resolution that he urged it to adopt, the wording of which was to say that the slavery-connected word Negro should be abandoned, and in its place, the words Afro or African American be applied to persons of African descent in the United States in all places where such reference to ethnic descent is appropriate. At a later conference session concerning resolutions, this one was unanimously adopted. In his presentation, Mr. Baird had defined what the cry for Black history is about. It is about the search for a people's identity and their need for a new image of themselves. The Black Americans are trying to locate themselves on the map of human geography. This explains the growing preference for the words Black African and Afro-American. These words show how Black Americans relate to a land, a history, and a culture. Educational reforms and community control. In a number of other conferences sponsored by the local branches of the American Federation of Teachers and the UFT, the teachers agreed on plans to implement courses in Black history. The main conferences were held in Detroit, May 11th to 13th, 1967, and in Chicago, March 22nd to 24th, 1968, and conferences in Denver and St. Louis followed. While many of the white teachers clearly admitted that racism is rampant in the American educational system, very few of them had any basic plan concerning what to do about it. Their reluctance to commit themselves to the correction of this racism caused a lot of Black teachers to form separate organizations, some within the framework of the American Federation of Teachers and the UFT. The Chicago Black Teachers Caucus was one. In New York City, the Afro-American Teachers Association was another. Still another organization, the Conference of Afro-American Educators, which met in Chicago in June 1968, shows the best potential of becoming a nationwide force to affect change in the educational system. At this conference, Donald Freeman, who renamed himself Baba Lumumba, defined education as it relates to Black people. What we understand by education is the application of all one's knowledge for the benefit of the collective, which in turn will benefit each individual within the collective. To this end, what must constitute a basic part of one's education is the understanding of people rather than things. We realize that once people understand themselves, their knowledge of things is facilitated, that the exclusive knowledge of things does not guarantee knowledge of people, and in fact contributes to the erosion, disintegration, and destruction of the creativity of man. Therefore, education must, 1, teach Black people who they are, 2, teach Black people what they are fighting for, 3, teach Black people who they must identify with, 4, teach Black people where their loyalty must lie, 5, teach Black people what must be done, 6, teach Black people how to do it, and 7, teach Black people that the destinies of all Black people are inseparably linked, whether we are in North, Central, or South America, the West Indies, Europe, Asia, or Africa. Broadening his explanation, Mr. Freeman continued, "Now, there must be a complete unity of all aspects of one's life, and in particular, education must be indelibly linked with one's life processes for the benefit of each Black man and woman and all Black people. Those who have knowledge primarily from books must be linked with those who have knowledge from the streets and vice versa to confront and solve all the problems of Black people. Education must assure that all of what one learns can be and will be applied to concrete practical problems and their solutions. If our people can throw Molotov cocktails in white stores, we can certainly throw Molotov cocktails in our minds. Mathematics, physics, electronics, sociology, religion, and other sciences must not be viewed as abstractions, but comprehended as the concentrated experiences of man's interrelationships with man, nature, and the universe to mold and control his own destiny. It is obvious that the American educational establishment is not ready to correct itself and implement these suggestions that it would consider extreme. This would not only be tantamount to correcting itself, it would also be tantamount to repudiating itself. At the base of the grievance of the Black teachers and growing numbers of Black people is the fact that they have been educated or miseducated in a system that has yet to acknowledge that they are an integral part of American or Western civilization. Both the clamor for Black power and Black history are the clamor of people to enter the mainstream of a society and to institute dynamic social reform, or to replace that society. The most far-reaching reforms will be in the field of education. Control is the key word in the school situation because it implies power to act in one's best interest at a time and a place of one's choosing. The educational establishment could digest or tolerate decentralization because the school system would still be run in the main by the educational establishment, which is a force operating outside of the local community. When community control is added to decentralization, a whole new area of power is defined. This means that the community will have the right to hire and fire teachers and to control the massive budget of the school system that is now a major American industry. In an address in Ann Arbor, Michigan, on May 25, 1968, Dr. Grace Boggs said, in effect, that the question of Black control of the schools has now become a question of survival for all Black people. Urban school systems are disintegrating before their eyes to the point where their actual physical and mental safety are at stake. Black children and their parents have lost the traditional respect for the teachers and principals of their schools because of the growing alienation between the school and the community. The mass media, principally television, have taught these children to become suspicious of most large establishments, especially police forces and governmental agencies that make promises which they do not keep. Many of the white teachers in the large educational systems in cities like New York, Detroit, Philadelphia, Chicago, and Los Angeles come to the system with preconceived notions about the ability of the black child to learn. Instead of teaching him, they spend a lot of time convincing themselves that the children are unteachable. They do not bring their best teaching ability to these communities because they do not respect the children or the community well enough to do so. In addition to being poor teachers for the black community, these teachers are not even good babysitters. In a lot of cases, they are arrogant, unfulfilled, and insecure people long overdue for analysis. Very often, the black child and the black community become whipping boys for their neuroses. Community control would mean that these teachers can be transferred or fired once their lack of qualifications has been proven. There is no attempt to drive all white teachers out of any black community. However, teachers who fall within the above description will not be secure under any form of community control. Decentralization and community control. Keith E. Baird, director of the Afro-American History and Cultural Unit of the Board of Education, gave the following explanation of decentralization and community control at the Summer Forum at Columbia University in August of 1968 on the Black experience. I'm going to talk about decentralization in the public schools and its implications. I use the term decentralization largely because it is the one that is generally used. Now, most words that begin with this prefix D suggest a kind of fall from grace. And I think that discussion about the changes that are being sought in the school system suffers somewhat from this semantic difficulty. I rejoice, however, to see that in this booklet, decentralization means reforming the present school system in New York City into largely autonomous school districts, joined with the Central Education Agency into a citywide federation. Now, this is a fairly decent and workable definition, but what does it actually mean in terms of the Black experience, the context in which we have come together to discuss this matter? We seem to have two separate questions before us: decentralization and community control. Of course, the two are not necessarily mutually exclusive. You can have decentralization without having community control, and you can have community control without having decentralization. Now, there is no problem about white people controlling the schools, because that, of course, is what has always happened. The schools are run by white people. The majority of the teachers are white, and the people who administer the schools are in great part white. Thus, we have what are essentially white schools, reflecting white interests, a white self-concept, and white culture. The question of community control comes in because certain enclaves, certain new ethnic enclaves, will now be having greater control, or at any rate, be in a better position to exercise control over the schools their children go to, provided, of course, that the rules and regulations of the New York City Board of Education actually permit this to happen. Thus, we come to what is really the crux of the situation, namely the control of schools in Afro-American and Puerto Rican areas by the Afro-American and Puerto Rican communities, particularly because these communities have not been significantly represented until now at the policymaking level in educational affairs. What community control boils down to is simply this: are we or are we not going to let Black people and Puerto Rican people really tell teachers what to do, especially tell white teachers what to do, and so on? That is really what this whole thing boils down to, and we may as well face up to it. The Intermediate School 201 and Ocean Hill, Brownsville controversies. Because most of the decentralization and community control talk in New York City is centered around Intermediate School 201 in Harlem and Ocean Hill, Brownsville in Brooklyn, it would be well to show the essence of the background of this conflict. The crucial issue of the Intermediate School 201 controversy is the poor quality of education in ghettos such as Harlem. From the first through the 12th grade, an increasingly larger proportion of ghetto youth perform below their grade level in reading and math. 87% of the pupils in the Harlem School District are below grade level. More than 2/3 of the pupils drop out before graduation from high school. Daniel Schreiber, the former assistant superintendent of District 4, in which Intermediate School 201 is located, verified these figures. The parents of School District 4 were willing to accept the promise of the Board of Education that integration would help solve the problem of poor education for their children. When Intermediate School 201 was proposed as a junior high school as far back as 1958, parents objected on the grounds that construction of a school at the proposed site would create another segregated school. As late as 1965, Dr. Bernard Donovan maintained that Intermediate School 201 would be an integrated school. He even alluded to having the school related to a university accompanied by special programs. By February of 1966, Daniel Schreiber maintained that Intermediate School 201 would be integrated, but by this time, integrated had come to mean representative groups of Black and Puerto Rican children. As early as March 28th, community representatives were demanding the establishment of a community group to which teachers would be responsible, in addition to the demand for an integrated school. Parents' opposition to the Board of Education's response, or lack of response, to these demands canceled the scheduled opening of Intermediate School 201 for the spring term of 1966. The school district was gerrymandered without the consultation of the community to create a student body of Puerto Ricans and Negroes. Integration gave way to quality education. By the end of the summer, the Board of Education had to admit that it had no plan for truly integrating Intermediate School 201. The parents, realizing that the Board of Education had no intention of integrating the schools of Harlem, focused attention on the basic problem of improving the quality of education in Harlem, with the realization that it would, in reality, have to be segregated. There is agreement between the parents and the Board of Education that the board has failed to integrate the Harlem schools. There is also agreement between the parents and the board that the quality of education in Harlem is low. The disagreement lies in the means used to improve the quality of education. The parents place the full responsibility for poor education in Harlem upon the Board of Education, whose present structure they feel is incapable of providing or administering a quality educational system to meet the needs of the ghetto community. The composition of the board, how its members are selected, and its source of power indicate the distance that exists between the body that makes educational policy and the community for whom the policy is made. The Ocean Hill, Brownsville decentralization experiment in Brooklyn, New York, was spoiled by success. The local school board, consisting mainly of parents from the community, took their job seriously and asked that a number of teachers who they deemed incompetent be transferred. This move seemed to have shocked and angered both the Board of Education and the head of the United Federation of Teachers. This abrupt exercising of power by the local school board and their unit administrator came unexpectedly. The two large Black ghettos of Brooklyn merge at Ocean Hill. Its inhabitants include a growing number of Puerto Ricans. Nothing of a dynamic nature was expected of these slum dwellers. In September 1966, the controversy around Intermediate School 201 in Harlem had a profound effect on the Ocean Hill, Brownsville school district. That month, a group of parents in Harlem demanded that the Board of Education respect their right to select the principal for Intermediate School 201. These parents were asking, for the first time, to have a voice in the administration of the schools in their community. The contagious cry for community control was now spreading beyond Harlem. It did not bypass the Ocean Hill, Brownsville School District in Brooklyn. After some protracted agitation, the Board of Education allowed the people of Ocean Hill to form an administrative unit with the understanding that the board would relinquish some of its authority to this unit. The administrative unit and the local governing board succeeded and began to exercise the authority that the Board of Education never thought it would use. This is the basis of their trouble with the Board of Education and the United Federation of Teachers. The dispute between the people of Ocean Hill, Brownsville on one side, and the Board of Education and United Federation of Teachers on the other side might well be a sad indication of what will soon be a national crisis in education. The cry for Black power and Black history has rekindled a long, smoldering fire that will no doubt affect major changes in the educational, political, and economic structure of the United States.